The wedding was moments from starting. The bride glided down the aisle of the church until the heavy oak doors swung open again. Then, the unthinkable happened. The groom's ex-wife stepped in hand with the bride's father. Eyes locked. Silence fell like a curtain. The groom stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. His ex-wife was now dating the father of his fiancée. The woman he'd left behind was poised to become the stepmother of his new love. What was meant to be a fairy tale wedding spiraled into scandal, a nightmare unfolding before everyone's eyes. Before I reveal the rest of this unforgettable day, drop a comment with where you're watching from and give this video a like to keep up with the story. The soft glow of late afternoon filtered through the sheer cotton curtains of the dining room, casting a deceptive calm over the neatly set table. The scent of basil and garlic wafted from the pot, where Laura simmered her homemade marinara sauce, a Friday ritual she'd kept for 18 years since marrying Daniel Harper. In the kitchen, the clink of silverware mingled with the giggles of 16-year-old Mason, who teased his 12-year-old sister Ava as she tried to perfect a sketch in her notebook. The scene painted a picture of family harmony, but beneath it, a storm was brewing, ready to break. Daniel trudged through the front door of their Seattle home, his steps heavy, weighed down by a decision he'd wrestled with for months. He hung his jacket on the entryway hook, pausing before crossing the hallway to the dining room. The familiar aroma of dinner, once a comfort, now felt stifling. He stopped at the threshold, watching Laura. At 42, she still had the quiet beauty that had captivated him in their youth, her auburn hair swept into a loose bun, her smile warm despite its weariness. But Daniel couldn't meet her eyes without a lump rising in his throat. For months, his heart had belonged to someone else, Chloe, his 28-year-old assistant, whose vibrant energy and promises of a fresh start had ensnared him. Laura turned, sensing him. "You're home early," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dinner's almost ready. Mason, help Ava set the table, please." Her voice was kind, but Daniel caught a faint quiver, as if she sensed something amiss. He swallowed hard, the words he'd rehearsed for weeks stuck in his chest. He didn't want to do this. Not now. Not with the kids there. But the truth was eating him alive. He needed to be honest, or so he told himself. They sat at the table, exchanging small talk about the day. Mason shared a story about a soccer game at school, while Ava bubbled with excitement over a science project due next week. Laura listened intently, but her eyes kept drifting to Daniel, searching for something he no longer gave. Connection. He pushed his pasta around his plate, his fork twirling aimlessly, his pulse racing. Every laugh from his kids, every glance from Laura, felt like a blade twisting in his conscience. How could he shatter something so precious? But Chloe was the future he craved, or so he convinced himself. "Laura," he began, his voice low, cutting through the hum of conversation. Everyone froze. Mason's brow furrowed, and Ava, fork halfway to her mouth, stared at her father with wide eyes. Laura looked up, her instincts bracing her for what was coming. "We need to talk," he faltered. I want a divorce." The silence that followed was deafening. Laura's fork clattered onto her plate, the metallic clang echoing like thunder. Mason's eyes widened while Ava let out a soft, almost inaudible sob. Laura blinked, as if trying to translate words from a foreign language. "What?" she asked, her voice trembling but steady, refusing to believe. Daniel took a deep breath, his heart pounding so loudly he thought the room could hear it. "I've fallen in love with someone else," he confessed, the words spilling out like poison he needed to purge. "It's Chloe, my assistant. It's not fair to you or the kids for me to keep pretending. I can't live like this anymore." Laura sat motionless, her face drained of color, as if her blood had fled. Her eyes, warm moments ago, now gleamed with a raw, nameless pain. Mason shoved his chair back, fists clenched. "Are you serious, Dad? You're cheating on Mom." His teenage voice cracked with anger and disbelief, his eyes glistening. Ava's sobs grew louder, muffled by her hands covering her face. "Why, Daddy, why are you doing this?" Her small voice sliced through everyone in the room. Daniel wanted to explain, to say it wasn't about them, that he still loved them, but the words would ring hollow, even to him. He knew no justification could erase the pain he was inflicting. "I don't expect you to understand now," he said, his voice breaking, "but I have to be honest. I can't keep living a lie." He stood, avoiding Laura's gaze, her stillness like a marble statue. "I'm going to grab some things and I'm leaving tonight." "Tonight?" Laura's voice was hoarse, each word a wound. "You're just walking out? Like that? After 18 years? Her tone held restrained fury, but also a plea, as if she hoped he'd laugh and call it a cruel joke. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. Every second in that room added weight to his shoulders. He walked to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase from the closet, and started tossing clothes inside, no rhyme or reason. He heard Mason's footsteps behind him. "You're a coward," the boy spat, his voice shaking with rage. "You don't deserve Mom. Or us." Daniel wanted to hug his son, to promise everything would be okay, but he knew any gesture would be rejected. He lowered his head and kept packing. In the dining room, Laura held Ava close, trying to soothe her while her own tears fell silently. Mason returned, fists still clenched, now with tears streaming down his face. "He's leaving, Mom. He's really leaving." Laura didn't respond. She just hugged her children tighter, as if she could shield them from the void Daniel was leaving behind. When Daniel returned with his suitcase, the silence was so thick it seemed to drain the air from the room. He looked at Laura, searching for something. Forgiveness, understanding, but found only an emptiness that made him shudder. "I'll call tomorrow," he mumbled, knowing the promise sounded empty. "I'll sort everything out." No one replied. He opened the door, and its closing echoed like the end of an era. Laura stayed seated, her arms wrapped around Mason and Ava. The food on the table grew cold, untouched. The clock on the wall ticked on, but for her, time seemed to halt. 18 years of marriage, laughter, fights, sleepless nights with the kids, shared dreams, crumbled in a single night. She looked at her children crying quietly and felt the weight of a question burning in her mind. How would she move forward? And why did he do this in front of their kids? In his car, Daniel drove aimlessly through Seattle's rain-slicked streets, the city lights blurring before his eyes. He thought of Chloe, her smile, her promise of a new life, but the images of Laura's devastation and his children's heartbreak wouldn't leave him. He'd chosen freedom, but at what cost? And why even now did he feel something about Chloe wasn't quite right? Meanwhile, in the house that was once a home, Laura wiped her tears and took a deep breath. She didn't know how, but she vowed to rebuild her life. For Mason, for Ava, and above all for herself. What she didn't know was that fate, with its cruel and capricious hands, was already weaving a web that would bring Daniel back into her life in a way neither could imagine. The sun rose timidly over Seattle, its golden rays barely warming the chill that had settled in Laura's heart. The house, once filled with laughter and chatter, now felt like a museum of memories, every corner heavy with loss. The morning after Daniel's departure, Laura woke with swollen eyes and a dry throat from crying. Mason and Ava were still asleep, drained from a night of tears and unanswered questions. She slipped on an old robe and shuffled to the kitchen, where the silence was broken only by the relentless ticking of the clock. She brewed coffee, but its bitter taste wasn't from the beans. It was the sting of betrayal, the uncertainty of the future she now faced alone. As the coffee maker hissed, Laura stared at the dining table, still cluttered with last night's untouched plates. Each fork, each glass, was a cruel reminder of the family that had shattered. She took a deep breath, her hands shaking around the mug. She couldn't let herself collapse. Not now. Mason and Ava needed her, and even if it hurt, she had to find the strength to be the foundation Daniel had abandoned. Sitting at the table, she opened a worn notebook and started listing tasks: lawyer, finances, the kids' school. But her pen froze when a question hit her like lightning. Who was Chloe? What did that woman have that she didn't? And why had Daniel chosen to destroy everything for her? Across town, Daniel woke in the sleek apartment he'd rented for his rendezvous with Chloe. The space was modern, with stark white walls and minimalist furniture, but it felt hollow despite the lingering scent of Chloe's floral perfume. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head throbbing. The previous night replayed like a movie he couldn't pause. Laura's shattered expression, Mason's fury, Ava's sobs. He rubbed his eyes, trying to push the images away, but they clung to him. Chloe entered the room, wearing a silk slip, her smile radiant against the storm in his chest. "Good morning, love," she said, leaning in to kiss him. "Today's the first day of our new life." Daniel forced a smile, but guilt choked any lightness he might have felt. "Yeah," he muttered, standing to avoid her gaze. Chloe was everything he thought he wanted. Young, lively, full of energy. But that morning doubt crept in. He couldn't name it, but a shadow dimmed his excitement. "I'm going to shower," he said, slipping into the bathroom before Chloe could press for more. At school, Mason arrived with dark circles under his eyes and a wrinkled uniform. His friends noticed the change, but he brushed off their questions with a grunt. During math class, he stared at his notebook, the numbers blurring as his mind replayed his father's words. "I've fallen in love with someone else." How could he? Mason's anger burned, but so did a pain he wouldn't admit. He wanted to confront Daniel, to make him see what he'd done. But the thought of seeing him with Chloe, the woman who stole his father, made him want to punch a wall. At recess, he hid in the courtyard, ignoring his friends' calls. What would become of them now? How could he protect Ava, who still believed their dad would come back? Ava spent the morning quiet, clutching her backpack like a shield. Her teacher, Ms. Diane, noticed her distant look and pulled her aside after class. "Everything okay, Ava?" she asked gently. Ava shook her head, eyes welling up. "My dad left," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Ms. Diane, a kind woman in her 50s with a heart as big as her patience, hugged her. "You're strong, sweetie. So is your mom. You'll get through this." Ava wanted to believe her, but the pain was too big. She just wanted her dad back, the family that sang in the car, that laughed over pizza nights. But that dad seemed gone forever. Laura spent the morning calling lawyers, each conversation a battle against tears. When a friend, Rachel, showed up at the door with a basket of homemade muffins, Laura broke down. "How could he do this, Rachel?" she sobbed. 18 years, and he threw it all away for some girl he barely knows. Rachel, practical but warm, held her hands. "You're stronger than you know, Laura. He'll regret this, but you can't stop now. Your kids need you." Rachel's words were a balm, but also a stark reminder of the hard road ahead. By late morning, Laura decided she needed more than friends' support. She booked an appointment with a therapist recommended by Rachel, a woman named Dr. Ellen, known for helping people rebuild after loss. In the waiting room, Laura flipped through a magazine without reading, her mind wandering. She thought of Daniel, how he'd changed over the past months, the silences, the late nights, the vague excuses. How had she missed it? Or worse, how had she ignored the signs, thinking it was just a phase? Meanwhile, Daniel tried to settle into his new routine with Chloe. She insisted on lunch at a trendy downtown bistro, saying they needed to celebrate the start of everything. The place buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but Daniel felt out of place. Chloe talked about plans, trips, a bigger house, even a wedding. "Don't you think it's time to make it official?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with expectation. Daniel hesitated, his fork hovering. "Let's take it slow, Chloe. There's the divorce, the kids." Mentioning his children made Chloe frown, but she quickly changed the subject, gushing about a dress she wanted. Daniel smiled politely, but the doubt gnawing at him grew. Who was Chloe, really? Why did she dodge questions about her own life? That afternoon, Laura picked up Mason and Ava from school. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the radio no one listened to. Mason finally spoke, his voice laced with anger. "Are you going to let him back, Mom? After what he did?" Laura gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "I don't know, Mason. But for now, it's us three. We'll take care of each other." Ava, in the back seat, sniffled. "He's still my dad," she whispered, barely audible. Laura's heart clenched. How could she explain that love didn't erase betrayal? In therapy that week, Laura poured her heart out to Dr. Ellen. She spoke of 18 years of marriage, the nights she sacrificed dreams to support Daniel, the pain of being replaced by a younger woman. "I feel like a failure," she admitted, tears streaming. Dr. Ellen listened, jotting notes. "You're not a failure, Laura. You're a survivor. This pain, it'll make you stronger." The words were a thin thread of hope, but Laura clung to them, wanting to believe. Meanwhile, Daniel faced his own struggles. Chloe was enchanting, but her demands were starting to weigh on him. She wanted to go out every night, expected gifts, craved constant attention. He began to see the differences between her and Laura. Laura was patient, grounded, selfless. Chloe was impulsive, sometimes selfish. During an argument about money, Chloe let slip something that stopped him cold. "My dad never gave me anything, so now I go after what I want." Daniel frowned. "You never talk about your dad. What happened?" Chloe looked away, her smile fading. "Nothing that matters. He lives his life, I live mine. He doesn't get my choices." The words hit Daniel, but he didn't press. Not yet. Mason at school grew more withdrawn. He stopped answering Daniel's calls, deleting messages unread. His grades slipped and teachers noticed. Ava, meanwhile, found solace in her sketches, drawing stories where families never broke apart. Laura saw their pain, each sign a cut to her heart, but she didn't give up. She joined a support group Rachel recommended, meeting other women who'd faced betrayal and rebuilt their lives. One, Karen, invited her to a group therapy session where people shared stories of resilience. At the first meeting, Laura felt intimidated. Men and women of all ages sat in a circle, each carrying their scars. When her turn came, she hesitated, but the words poured out. "I gave him everything, 18 years, and now he's with someone else, and I don't know who I am without him." The silence that followed wasn't judgment, it was understanding. A middle-aged man with kind eyes and a deep voice spoke next. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. Not to betrayal, but to a car accident. And you know what I learned? Pain doesn't define you. What you do with it does." His name was Robert, and his calm touched Laura. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Daniel, meanwhile, got a call from his lawyer. The divorce would be messy, especially with the kids involved. He needed to decide on custody, alimony, asset division. Each detail forced him to think of Laura, how she was coping. He tried calling Mason, but the boy didn't pick up. He tried Ava, but it went to voicemail. Guilt consumed him. But Chloe was always there, distracting him with plans and promises. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Chloe was a mystery, and he wondered if the passion he felt was enough to justify what he'd abandoned. That night, Laura gathered Mason and Ava in the living room. "We're going to get through this," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "We're a family, with or without him." Mason stared at the floor, but Ava curled into her mother's lap. Laura hugged them both, feeling the weight of responsibility but also a spark of determination. The morning breeze rustled the curtains in the living room, where Laura sorted papers on the coffee table, trying to bring order to the chaos her life had become. The sun glinted off dusty family photos she hadn't yet found the courage to pack away. Each one was a reminder of a time that felt distant but still ached in her chest. In recent days, she'd thrown herself into practical tasks, lawyer meetings, school conferences, bills, to keep her mind busy and the pain at bay. Mason and Ava, each in their own way, struggled to adjust to the new reality, but Daniel's absence loomed like a shadow over them all. Laura picked up the phone to confirm her next support group session. The voices from the last meeting, especially Robert's, lingered in her mind. There was something about those stories of loss that made her feel less alone. Across town, Chloe, with her tireless energy, planned every detail of their new life. But Daniel felt increasingly trapped. That morning, over coffee, he tried talking about his kids. "I need to reach Mason and Ava," he said, worry lacing his voice. "They're not answering my calls." Chloe rolled her eyes, stirring her coffee with a small silver spoon. "They'll get over it, Daniel. Kids always do. Don't you think it's time to focus on us?" Her words grated on him. He wanted this woman, but her coldness, a detachment he hadn't noticed before, unsettled him. He thought of Laura, how she always put Mason and Ava first, even in the toughest times. "They're my kids, Chloe," he said, sharper than intended. "It's not that simple." Chloe shrugged, her perfect smile not reaching her eyes. "You chose to be here, didn't you? So leave the past behind." Daniel's chest tightened, but he didn't argue. Something about her made him hesitate, like every conversation was a test he wasn't sure he wanted to pass. At school, Mason wrestled with his own demons. He'd become distant, even from his closest friends. During soccer practice, he played with an aggression that alarmed his coach. "Easy, Mason," the coach said after a rough tackle took down a teammate. "What's going on with you?" Mason shook his head and stormed to the locker room, sitting with his head in his hands. He thought of his father, the betrayal, his mother trying to hold it together. He wanted to protect her, to be the man of the house, but at 16 he didn't know how. A text from Daniel flashed on his phone. "Son, we need to talk. Give me a chance." Mason deleted it without replying, torn between anger and longing. Laura, determined not to buckle under the weight of her children's pain, started attending the support group regularly. The meetings were held in a modest room with chairs in a circle and a coffee pot that never ran cold. Each shared story mirrored her own hurt, but also showed healing was possible. Robert, the widower with kind eyes, always sat beside her, offering a quiet smile that made her feel seen. During one session, he opened up more. "My daughter, Chloe, changed a lot after her mom died," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "She pulled away, started dating people I didn't approve of. I never knew how to reach her." Laura felt a chill at the name Chloe, but brushed it off. It was common enough. She touched his arm, a gesture of comfort. "You did what you could," she said. "Sometimes kids need to find their own way." Robert looked at her, his eyes warm with gratitude and something deeper, something Laura wasn't ready to name. "And you, Laura? How are you holding up?" he asked. She paused, words caught in her throat. "One day at a time," she said, forcing a smile. "But sometimes it feels like I'm fighting an emptiness that doesn't explain itself." Robert nodded, as if he knew exactly what she meant. After the meeting, he walked her to her car, and for the first time in weeks, Laura felt a human warmth that didn't come from her kids. Meanwhile, Daniel saw the cracks in his new life widen. Chloe's possessiveness surfaced. She questioned every call, every moment he spent away from the apartment. During a dinner, she snapped when he mentioned visiting his lawyer about custody. "You're still tied to that life, Daniel," she shouted, tossing her napkin on the table. "If you want to be with them so much, why are you here with me?" Daniel went silent, stunned. He wanted to argue, but something in her voice made him back off. It was as if she feared losing him, but also hid something deeper, something he couldn't grasp. That night, Daniel dreamed of Laura. She was in the kitchen, laughing with Mason and Ava, while he watched from outside, unable to enter. He woke with his heart racing, the guilt heavier than ever. He glanced at Chloe, sleeping beside him, and wondered for the first time if his passion for her was real or just an escape. He grabbed his phone and typed a message to Laura. "Can we talk? I just want to know how you're doing." But he hesitated, deleting the words. He had no right to ask anything, not after what he'd done. Laura, meanwhile, found small moments of lightness. At the support group, she bonded with Karen, who invited her for coffee outside the meetings. Karen was vibrant, a survivor of a brutal divorce who now volunteered at a local charity. "You need to find something that's just yours, Laura," Karen said over coffee at a cozy Seattle cafe. "Something to remind you who you are, beyond mom and wife." Laura thought about it and recalled her old dream of writing. She used to pen short stories in her youth, but marriage and motherhood had locked that dream away. Maybe, she thought, it was time to dust it off. At school, Mason faced a crisis. A teacher pulled him aside, worried about his grades. "You're one of our best students, Mason," the teacher said, "but something's holding you back. Want to talk?" Mason shook his head, but the conversation made him think. He didn't want to let his mom down, not when she was carrying so much. He decided to try harder, but his anger at his dad still simmered. In a moment of impulse, he replied to Daniel's text, "Don't want to talk. Leave us alone." He sent it before he could second guess, his heart heavy. Daniel got Mason's message, and it hit like a punch. He sat on the couch, phone in hand, and for the first time since leaving home, let tears fall. He thought of Laura, the kids, the life he'd thrown away. Chloe walked in, noticing his state. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone more annoyed than concerned. Daniel shook his head. "Nothing," he lied, but he was starting to see the flaws in the life he'd chosen. That night, Laura attended another support group meeting. Robert was there, as always, and they talked more. He shared about his wife, how her loss changed him, and Laura opened up about the void Daniel left, especially for the kids. "Ever thought about starting something new?" Robert asked over coffee after the meeting. "Something just for you?" Laura smiled, thinking of Karen's advice. "Maybe," she said, feeling a spark of possibility. Robert met her eyes, and for a moment, the world felt lighter. The Seattle sky glowed orange as Laura sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, keys clicking softly as she wrote. Months had passed since Daniel left, and though the pain still lingered, writing had become her anchor. Each story, each line, reclaimed the woman she'd been before marriage, before she lost herself in the roles of wife and mother. Her tales, of women overcoming betrayal, of families finding strength, mirrored her own journey, and for the first time in years, she felt a breath of freedom. Daniel, meanwhile, felt the weight of his choices grow heavier. The divorce was finalized, a grueling process that forced him to face lawyers and decisions he'd avoided. Mason still ignored his texts, and his rare meetings with Ava were brief, held in coffee shops far from Chloe's watchful eyes. She disapproved of these visits, always urging him to move on from the past. Daniel tried to excuse her coldness as jealousy, but each refusal to support his bond with his kids cracked his heart further. He loved Ava, missed Mason, but their rejection and Chloe's pressure pushed him into a guilty silence. Chloe seemed intent on erasing Daniel's old life. She planned a romantic getaway to a coastal resort in Oregon, with white sands and turquoise waters, meant to reignite their spark. During the trip, Chloe was magnetic. She danced for him in their room, whispered promises of a perfect future, laughed at his jokes with an intensity that briefly drowned his guilt. One night, strolling along the beach, she squeezed his hand and said, her eyes gleaming with calculation, "Now that the divorce is done, why not take the next step? A wedding, Daniel. You and me forever." His heart raced, but not with joy. Doubt, mixed with an unnamed fear, gripped him. He smiled weakly, murmuring, "We'll see," his voice shakier than he meant. While Daniel wrestled with passion and uncertainty, Laura bloomed. The support group became a cornerstone of her life, and her talks with Karen and Robert spilled beyond the meeting room. They met for coffee, dinners, sharing laughter and stories that eased the past's weight. Robert, with his deep voice and eyes that saw beyond words, grew ever present. One afternoon, over coffee in a sunlit square, he asked to read one of Laura's stories. She hesitated, cheeks flushing with a shyness she hadn't felt in years, but handed over her notebook. Robert read silently, and when he finished, his eyes shone. "You've got a gift, Laura," he said, his voice full of awe. "These words, they've got soul. Don't ever stop." The praise wrapped her like a hug, and for the first time she felt proud of herself. Her bond with Robert deepened. A dinner invitation led to park walks, then a candlelit evening where he took her hand and said, "Laura, you've brought color back to my life. I know it's soon, I know you've been through so much, but I'd like to try something real with you." Laura's heart raced, fear mingling with hope. She thought of Daniel, the pain he'd caused, but also the emptiness Robert filled with his patience and care. "I want to try too," she replied, her voice trembling but resolute. That night, they took the first step toward a cautious but hopeful romance. Robert was everything Daniel hadn't been in years, attentive, present, a man who truly listened. He took Ava for ice cream, helped Mason with math homework, without pushing for closeness the boy wasn't ready for. Mason, still hurt by his father, began to soften, impressed by Robert's patience. Ava loved Robert's stories of his youth, giggling in a way she hadn't in months. Laura watched it all, her heart torn between gratitude for this new chance and guilt for feeling so much so soon. But when Robert hugged her, when he read her stories and said he believed in her, she felt loved in a way she'd never known. At school, Ava shone in an art contest. Her drawing, a family gathered under a rainbow, won first place, and Laura cried as Ava accepted the award. "It's for you, Mom," Ava said, handing her the trophy with a shy smile. Mason, watching from the audience, clapped with pride, though his eyes still held a shadow of anger toward his father. He'd met Daniel once at Laura's urging in a park, but the talk was tense, full of unspoken accusations. "You traded us for her," Mason said before leaving, leaving Daniel's heart in knots. Chloe, meanwhile, pushed Daniel harder. The trip's success convinced her he was ready to commit, and she began planning a wedding without his full agreement. "Picture it, Daniel. A beach ceremony, just us and a few friends," she said, flipping through bridal magazines. Daniel tried to match her enthusiasm, but each mention of marriage brought back images of Laura, the kids, the life he'd destroyed. During an argument, Chloe let slip something that stopped him. "My dad never wanted me around after I grew up, you know. He chose his life over his daughter. That's why he won't be at our wedding." Daniel frowned, puzzled, but her passion swayed him from pressing further. "Okay," he said, ignoring the unease growing in his chest. Laura, on the other hand, felt reborn. She sent her stories to small publishers, and one was accepted for a local anthology. When she told Robert, he hugged her so tightly she nearly cried. "You're incredible, Laura," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'll be here for every step." Robert invited her to his modest home, filled with memories of his late wife. He showed her old photos, including one of his daughter, Chloe, as a teenager. Laura smiled, noting how pretty the girl was, unaware of the connection that name held. Robert sighed, his voice heavy with regret. "She drifted so far from me. Sometimes I feel I failed as a father." Laura squeezed his hand, comforting him. "You're a good man, Robert. She'll see that someday." The city lights twinkled as Daniel sat in his sparse apartment, organizing the final pieces of his new life. The loneliness clung to him, even with Chloe planning a future he wasn't sure he wanted. Learning Laura was dating hit him like a bolt from the blue. A mutual friend mentioned her newfound glow, how she seemed reborn. Daniel felt a void he couldn't explain, a mix of jealousy and regret that made him question everything. He decided to move forward with Chloe, as if a wedding could erase his doubts. Over a candle-lit dinner, he took her hand, heart pounding, and asked, "Chloe, will you marry me?" Chloe's eyes sparkled as she squealed yes, but her condition made him pause. "I want it perfect, Daniel, but no family, not your kids, and definitely not my dad. We had a huge fight, and we haven't spoken in years." Daniel found it odd, but her excitement convinced him not to push. "Fine," he said, ignoring the unease tightening his chest. Meanwhile, Laura's heart felt lighter than ever. Her relationship with Robert brought a peace she hadn't known in years. He was a safe harbor, a man who made her laugh and dream. One morning over coffee at a charming bistro, Robert opened up. "I heard from a friend that my daughter Chloe is getting married," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's strange. I miss her so much, but I don't know how to reach out. I've lost so much time." Laura squeezed his hand, her heart aching for his pain. "You should try, Robert. A wedding's the perfect time to start over. She's your daughter, and love always finds a way." Robert smiled, his eyes misty, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in years. "You think she'd want me there?" he asked. Laura nodded, certain. "Absolutely. Let's surprise her at the wedding. It'll be beautiful, Robert. I'll be there with you." The idea of surprising Chloe took root. Laura and Robert spent days planning, imagining the joy of a reconciliation. Robert, tears in his eyes, shared his deepest wish. "I want to walk her down the aisle, Laura. She's my only daughter, and despite everything, that's every dad's dream." Laura's heart swelled with tenderness. "It'll be perfect," she promised. "It'll be a day to remember." Laura pictured it. Robert, dapper in his suit, walking beside his daughter, tears of forgiveness sealing years of distance. She couldn't wait to witness it. Meanwhile, Daniel was a bundle of nerves as the wedding neared. Chloe planned every detail with precision, insisting on a ceremony at a quaint Seattle church just for close friends. When Daniel suggested inviting Mason and Ava, Chloe was firm. "It's better they don't know, Daniel. I don't want drama." He agreed, but the decision gnawed at him. Keeping the wedding from his kids felt wrong, but facing their disappointment, Mason's anger, or Ava's hurt, was more than he could bear. The day before the wedding, Chloe was a whirlwind of nerves, on the phone for hours arranging flowers, music, the perfect dress. Robert, meanwhile, prepared for his surprise. He bought a new navy suit, which Laura helped pick out. "You'll look amazing," she said, adjusting his tie with a care that made him smile. Robert held her hands, his voice thick. "If Chloe accepts me back, it'll be because of you, Laura. You gave me courage." Laura's heart tightened. picturing the joy of their reunion. The wedding day dawned clear, but tension hung in the air. Daniel arrived early at the church, his suit pristine but his heart heavy. He stood at the altar trying to focus, but thoughts of Laura and the kids haunted him. Chloe prepared in the sacristy, her white dress glowing like a promise of happiness. The wedding march began, soft and solemn, echoing through the small church. Chloe walked alone down the aisle as she'd insisted, her dress trailing, her face veiled. Daniel smiled, trying to convince himself she was the woman he chose, the future he wanted. But as Chloe neared the altar, the church doors creaked open loudly, halting the music. Everyone turned, startled. Robert rushed in, elegant in his new suit, his eyes bright with hope and nerves. He couldn't stay away, not on his only daughter's wedding day. Behind him, Laura followed, her face beaming with support, ready to witness the reunion they'd planned. Then, time stopped. Daniel at the altar saw Laura, his ex-wife, entering the church. The shock made him stagger, his breath stolen. Laura, seeing Daniel at the altar, felt the floor vanish beneath her. It was him, the man who broke her heart. Chloe, frozen mid-aisle, looked from her father, whom she'd shut out, to Laura, the woman who unknowingly was her new stepmother. Robert in turn stared at Daniel, his daughter's groom, the man who'd shattered the heart of the woman he now loved. He recognized Daniel instantly. The silence was suffocating. Guests whispered, confused, as the pastor cleared his throat, unsure. Chloe, her veil trembling in her hands, whispered, "Dad, what are you doing here?" Her voice mixed anger and panic. Laura, pale, glanced at Robert, who looked as lost as she felt. Daniel, unable to move, felt the weight of his choices crash down. Laura stepped back, heart racing, unsure whether to scream or flee. Robert gripped her hand, confused but steady. "Laura, what's going on?" he asked, his voice shaking. Chloe, tears streaming, looked from her father to Daniel, then to Laura, as if unraveling a nightmare. The pastor, trying to restore order, asked, "Shall we proceed?" No one answered. The silence in the church was thick, swallowing the sound of racing hearts. Daniel's heart pounded as the world spun. He looked at Laura, the woman he'd abandoned, then at Chloe, the woman he was about to marry, Robert's daughter, Laura's future stepdaughter. The realization hit like a gut punch. He'd torn his family apart for Chloe, unaware of her connection to Laura. The shock made him sway, his suit suffocating him. He wanted to speak, to explain, but words failed. All he could do was stare at Laura, searching for a trace of the woman who once loved him. Laura felt the ground collapse. Seeing Daniel at the altar, ready to marry Robert's daughter, was too much. The man who broke her heart, who left their kids, was now tied to her in a way that defied reason. Old pain mixed with a rage she didn't know she still carried. Without a word, she turned, her blue dress swirling as she hurried toward the exit, the church air unbearable. She needed to breathe to escape this nightmare. Daniel, acting on instinct, left the altar, ignoring the guests' murmurs and Chloe's stunned gaze. "Laura," he called, his voice raw, chasing her outside into the warm Seattle sun. He caught up to her, his eyes wild with confusion. "Laura, please, tell me what's happening," he pleaded. Laura stopped, turning to him, tears she fought to hold back, glistening. "Leave me alone, Daniel," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. "You made your choice, live with it." Before Daniel could respond, Robert appeared, his steps firm but his face etched with emotion. He ignored Daniel and went straight to Chloe, still in the aisle, her veil crumpled in her hands. "Chloe," he said, his voice trembling with hurt and anger. "You were his mistress. You destroyed Laura's marriage?" Guests gasped, the silence shattered by shocked whispers. Chloe tried to speak, but her words faltered. Robert, tears in his eyes, raised his hand and slapped her face, the sound echoing like thunder. "How could you?" he shouted, his voice breaking. "You knew what you did and went through with it." Chloe stumbled, tears falling, her veil dropping to the floor. Shame consumed her, and without a word she fled through the church's side door, her white dress trailing as she vanished. Daniel, still outside with Laura, heard the commotion and ran back, only to see Chloe disappear. He wanted to follow, but his feet felt glued to the ground. Everything was collapsing and he was to blame. Robert, heartbroken, walked to Laura outside, her hands trembling. He took her hand, his eyes full of love and resolve. "Laura," he said, his voice steady despite the pain, "this isn't our place. I love you and I won't let this break us." Laura looked at him, tears falling, but felt a new strength rising. She nodded, squeezing his hand, and together they walked away from the church, leaving the chaos and pain behind. Daniel, at the entrance, watched them go, his heart constricting. He gazed at Laura, hand in hand with Robert, and for the first time wondered, what had he done with his life? Inside, the pastor, at a loss, cleared his throat and announced, "The ceremony is over." Guests, still reeling, began to leave, whispering among themselves. The music stopped, and silence reigned, heavy as a verdict. Daniel, too drained to face the stairs, walked into the street, wandering aimlessly. Seattle's lights, once a promise of a bright future with Chloe, now left him lost. He thought of Laura, Mason, Ava, the choices that led to this moment. Each step reminded him of what he'd lost. Days later, Daniel sat in his empty apartment, the silence broken only by his breathing. He picked up his phone and texted Chloe, "I can't do this. It's not fair to Laura, my kids, or me. We can't be a family like this. Goodbye." He sent it, his heart heavy but certain it was the only way. Chloe, already distant, replied with a curt, "Fine," before vanishing. Weeks later, word spread she'd left for a study abroad program, cutting ties with the city and everyone in it. Daniel didn't try to find her. He knew what he felt wasn't love, but an escape from himself. Laura and Robert faced the revelation with shock, but renewed strength. In Laura's living room, with Mason and Ava beside them, they talked it out. "I never imagined Chloe was Robert's daughter," Laura said, her voice still shaky. "But what I feel for you is real, and that won't change." Robert held her hand, his eyes shining with gratitude. "I love you, Laura. I'll always be here." Mason, silent until then, spoke up. "You're good for Mom, Robert. That's what matters." Ava, clutching her art contest trophy, smiled shyly. "You're staying, right?" she asked. Robert laughed, pulling her into a hug. "I'm staying, kiddo, I'm staying." Daniel, now alone, worked to rebuild what was left of his life. He tried reaching out to Mason and Ava, knowing it would take time to earn their trust. He sent messages, offered meetups, but gave them space. Each rejection stung, but he understood. He started therapy, sharing his story of regret, searching for redemption. "I destroyed my family," he admitted in a session, tears falling. "But I'll fight to be someone my kids can respect again." Laura published her first book, a collection of stories about resilience and love. At the launch, Robert stood by her side, beaming with pride, while Mason and Ava grinned among the guests. The publisher, impressed, offered a contract for a second book. Laura looked at her new family, Robert, Mason, Ava, and felt her heart overflow. The pain of the past hadn't vanished, but it had transformed into strength, hope, and true love. One quiet night, as Laura and Robert walked hand in hand through a Seattle park, he stopped and pulled her into an embrace. "You saved me, Laura," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and I'll spend the rest of my life showing you how much I love you." Laura smiled, tears glinting in the moonlight. "You saved me too," she replied, kissing him softly. Behind them, the starry sky stretched wide, and for the first time in years, Laura felt the future was a promise, not a threat. But somewhere in the city, Daniel walked alone, the weight of his choices still heavy. He knew redemption would be a long road, but a small flame of hope burned in him. Maybe one day Mason and Ava would forgive him. Maybe one day he could forgive himself. As Laura and Robert built a future together, Daniel vowed to become a better man, even if it was too late to reclaim what he'd lost. Not every loss is the end. Sometimes it's the start of a new version of ourselves. She rose from the ashes, and he learned too late the value of what he left behind. So never take for granted those who truly love you. Time doesn't turn back, and some wounds don't heal with a simple apology. If this story moved you, drop a like and subscribe for more stories that touch the soul. Until next time.